Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa and this is going to be my May wrap-up. I've got a few different genres to talk about. I think I read 12 or so books. The genres include contemporary, fantasy, romance, and nonfiction. So let's start with contemporary. I have A Map for Falasteen. This is about a little girl, it's a picture book, who goes to school, and at her school they have a day where everyone figures out where they're from on a map of the world, and Falasteen looks for where she knows her parents and grandparents came from, which is Palestine, and she can't find it on the map. So that day she goes home and asks her various family members why Palestine isn't on a map. And she hears stories from her grandpa and her grandma and her mom about their experiences and about how their homeland lives on in them despite not being recognized by most people. Here are some of the illustrations. Then we have Starfish by Lisa Phipps. This is a story in verse about a young girl who is plus size. She's in middle school, which is harsh for a lot of people, but particularly for people who have any kind of marginalization. And this book addresses that a little bit in that bullies are usually not bullies to random targets. They're usually bullies to people along marginalization lines. And it also addresses how some people who have been bullied go on to bully other people and how that doesn't make it okay. It also talks about her mother being her biggest bully, all the things that her mother does that tear down her self-esteem in the name of motivating her to lose weight. And it also talks about our main character finding friendship with people who don't think that her being fat makes her any less of a person or a good friend. It also talks about therapy and shows, in this case, therapy being helpful. And it also shows doctors being fatphobic and talks about weight loss surgeries that have been done on children even younger than our main character, which is really upsetting. I think it's really well done. And while it might be triggering for some fat people, especially young people, I think it could also offer a lot of comfort because of the ultimate hopeful message and the good experiences that our character has. 5 stars. Another contemporary was True Biz. I read this at the beginning of the month as an audiobook. It was one of the ones that I had checked out during the Disability Readathon in April and that I rolled over into May. And this one was very interesting. It is written by a deaf author and is all about a school for the deaf. And while it talks to some extent about integration and how it's good for disabled people to be a part of abled society and how they should have accommodations in abled society that make them able to take part, it mostly comes down on the side of there should be places that are specifically for deaf people, and as things are now, deaf schools are necessary because the accommodations that are provided in public schools are pretty crap. And they especially lean toward a oral model, which was introduced a long time ago. They talk a little bit about the history of the oral models, and that's basically where they try to get deaf people to speak aloud and like read lips and act as if they can hear and ignore the fact that they're deaf, sometimes with the aid of, I can't remember the name right now, but they're a type of implant that somewhat allows the brain to receive sound signals. And also talked about in this is how rich kids who are able to have lots and lots of therapy, it's not exactly occupational therapy, but it's a type of therapy that works on helping them process the sounds that are coming in, because a lot of times people who newly have implants will just hear kind of noise and aren't able to make sense of the sounds that they're hearing. Kids who are able to get lots and lots of therapy are often able to learn how to process the sounds and can basically go the oral route, whereas kids who don't have a lot of those supported therapies offered through their insurance, or who don't have much insurance, the outcomes for those kids are much poorer. And it also talked about the danger of putting a relatively untested implant in your brain and the things that come of that for one of our characters. There are 3 main characters, 2 students at the deaf school and the director, I think. It starts with sort of the flashpoint of the director reacting to 3 or 4 kids having gone missing from the deaf school, and the director trying to deal with that and find the kids, and then goes back in time for the rest of the story, starting at an earlier point and then working up to that crisis. I really enjoyed all the information. There was loads of nonfiction type information in this fiction book, but I also really liked the characters and the story. I liked the kid characters. I found myself very irritated with the director character. She had an emotional affair with another woman who wasn't her wife pretty much throughout the book, and she acts like her wife is unreasonable for being jealous of this person, and maybe she was preemptively too jealous, but then maybe she knew on a subconscious level that she had married someone who was perfectly willing to have an emotional affair. Cheating bugs me immensely. It's right up there with lying to make yourself look better. Those are the 2 things that if a fictional character does them, other people might not be bothered as much, like not think that that's a big deal, but to me, those are really big deals. Ultimately, really enjoyed it. 4 stars. Then this book, Trees for the Absentees by Alam Basharat. I don't actually know where this fits under spec fic. There's a little bit of magic, but it's very small, so it might be like fabulism. But our main character is someone who lives in, I think, the West Bank, and she is Palestinian, and she works at a hammam, which is somewhere where it's kind of like a spa, where she bathes women and like treats their skin and stuff. So it talks about that, and it talks about her grandmother's job of washing dead bodies, and also she was kind of a midwife, so she helped babies be born and washed the babies. It talks about this sort of other alternate reality that she goes into sometimes, where she meets a man that she kind of falls in love with, and kind of talks about her sort of dream life in this alternate reality where she has this relationship and how that affects her own reality in her own life. I wouldn't say I totally get it, but if you like alternate reality stories and very contemplative stories, this might even fall under literary fiction, actually. So if you like those sort of things, you might like this one. It's very short, and I gave it 4 stars. The other fantasy I read was May a Divine Awaken, which I have a full review of up on my channel. I think I gave it 3 stars. It's indie published, and I think it could have used a lot more editing, but I do think that the author has a lot of potential, and I'm really willing to read more of his work. For nonfiction, I read Fall Down 7 Times, Get Up 8. This is by the same Japanese autistic author who wrote The Reason I Jump. This author is what a lot of people refer to as high support needs. He has someone who goes with him when he goes out to stores and things as his sort of assistant or caregiver, and he, I believe, lives with his parents. And he generally uses an AAC device to communicate. And the introduction to this book is all about someone involved in the publishing or maybe the translating process who helped this book get translated and published in, I think, the UK. How he has an autistic kid who uses AAC and has a lot in common with the author. He talks a lot about how people will try to speak over high support need autistic people by saying that they can't speak for themselves, and that anyone who's autistic who can speak for themselves isn't autistic enough to be able to speak on autistic issues, and how the fact that the author can write a book means that he's not really non-speaking and that he must be faking it. So it was a really interesting introduction. The rest of the book is fairly short essays by the author on his daily life and his experiences. His other book was written when he was about 12, and so this is more what he's writing as an adult, about how he's changed over the years and things that he's able to do now as an adult that he wasn't able to do as a child, and his different perspectives on things. I really enjoyed it. I really found it interesting. There's also a couple of essays that are a lot about his relationship with his mom, and it reminded me a lot of my relationship with my mom. Some of the sweet gestures he made for her made me really emotional, and it makes me think of, I wanted to mention briefly that there are a lot of autistic self-activists who are speaking and who talk about their own experiences and sometimes talk about autistic people as a whole because of research that they've done. Speaking autistic people, which is not always necessarily the same as low support needs. There are speaking autistic people who have medium to high support needs, but autistic people who don't use AAC devices and who are speaking tend to be able to amass a following. The people who use AAC devices are not as easily able to do. People who are lower support needs are often more able to maintain a following and make enough content to get out there and have their voices heard more easily. And so I think it's part of our duty to our fellow autistic people who have higher support needs, who use AAC devices, to uplift their voices so that they can be heard as much as we are. This also brings into play parents of high support needs autistic people. Both speak over and can be spoken over by low support needs autistic people. And I think there definitely is a place for parents of autistic people who are not autistic themselves to speak and talk about their experiences and advocate for their children. But there is also the case of some people who are non-autistic parents of autistic kids, or even sometimes autistic parents of autistic kids, have not addressed their own internalized ableism or the ableism they hold toward their kid, and they can promote the autism destroys families narrative and act like they are the martyrs and the one being most oppressed in the situation rather than their child. To an extent, I think, much like with identity politics versus deference politics, there should be somewhat more of a focus on what is being said by the person rather than the identity that they're claiming. So if a non-disabled parent of an autistic person is promoting that we need more AAC devices and we need more accommodations for these kids, and my kids' needs are this, which is in conflict with some other autistic people's needs or is just different from other autistic people's needs, then I think we should listen to that. But if a non-disabled parent of an autistic person is saying autism needs a cure, and I want people to study autistic people's DNA so that we can find out what causes autism so we can abort them before they're born, then we shouldn't listen to that person. That wasn't as brief as I meant it to be. Yeah, even people who are marginalized can be wrong about how to treat people with that marginalization or like what needs to be done in relation to it. I have not yet read the book Elite Capture, but if you want further reading on deference politics versus identity politics, I have heard that that is a very good source. Okay, my other nonfiction I read was By the Fire We Carry, which is all about the indigenous people, the history of resistance, and the history of trying to hold on to their land and their people and their culture and their identities over couple hundred years, especially how resistance in the past led to more ability to resist in the present. It specifically jumps back and forth between slowly progressing through the past and looking at a specific court case that I think was in the mid-2010s that was about a murder case and then a rape case, specifically child sexual assault, that happened on reservation land that was used to have the Supreme Court make a decision as to whether or not the reservation still existed. And so it was very informative just about history, but I also really valued the theory and exploration of the idea that everything that these people had done up till then enabled the Supreme Court's decision. 5 stars. Rivka is poetry, and by a Palestinian, I think, who lives in the diaspora. Some of the poems were especially meaningful. I really liked the one about his grandma. I have a hard time talking about poetry because I often don't think I totally understood what was being meant, and then I don't know what to say about it, but I think it was well done. If you enjoy poetry, you might want to check it out. Especially very emotional poetry. 4 stars. Some romance. First of all, Tears of the Wolf. I will put the author's YouTube down below because she makes lots of YouTube shorts and I really enjoy watching them, especially her older ones that are where she plays sort of characters. One of her most recent books to come out was called Tears of the Wolf, and from some of the character play that she had done about it, I was very interested, so I checked it out and I really liked it. This is about the Anglo-Saxons up north towards Scotland, and this is also fantasy. So one of our main characters is a sorceress, and our other main character is, I don't remember what they're called, but they're basically a nobleman because they have control over this piece of land, and they have a fair number of people who are sort of sworn to them, who they bring to battles for the king, and these two have an arranged marriage, and they're really cute with each other. They just try right from the start to take care of each other and be kind to each other, and I love that so much. And they're also having to deal with the warlike tendencies of both the nobleman's neighbors and also the Viking type people. I'm not actually sure who they are specifically, but who come from the sea to attack sometimes. And I really particularly love the ending allies that come into play that are kind of set up earlier in the book and how that worked. I loved that. Trying to be vague, but it was so good. Then I actually read a romance that was recommended by this author. She also does occasional reviews of other people's books, and this one is called The Lotus Palace. She actually recommended a different one in the series, but the one that my library had was The Lotus Palace, which is kind of the first one. And this series is set in China, I think medieval China, so in the mid-hundreds, maybe the 800s. But before the year 1000 AD. And so there's an emperor, and there's all these noble people, and there are also courtesans. And it was really interesting because courtesans have a different sort of place in society than a lot of sex workers in, say, England, which is where I read most of my period romances. Although I think that these courtesans held a more similar place in society to some of the sex workers in Italy at some periods that I've heard talked about. But yeah, I kind of had to just read along and kind of trust the world building to tell me eventually how this works and how courtesans are different from. There are also other sex workers in this society who are lower brow, who get paid a lot less and are treated a lot worse. Anyway, it's not all explained in like a lore dump. It's very slowly explained over the course of the book, and I really liked how that was done. So you just kind of have to go along for the ride like you would in a fantasy book, but it's not a fantasy. It's just a history that I'm not familiar with. The lack of heavy lore dumps, but just enough to make you understand where the characters are coming from and how that would affect the plot and what the characters believe about themselves and the possibilities for their life. So this book is about the maid of a courtesan falling in love with a nobleman. It was kind of slightly possible for a nobleman to want to marry a courtesan, but the maid of a courtesan was like too many steps away from being a noblewoman. So there's this impossibility of them being able to be together, and meanwhile they're solving some murders. Gives them an excuse to spend time together is the solving of the murder mystery. And I was really worried because it was getting close to the end and I did not see how this was going to end well. So I was very much counting on the fact that this booktuber, author-tuber had said that this was a romance, so it has to have a happy ending, and the two people have to get together. So it's like, how is this gonna happen? I was so stressed. I stayed up late reading it, but it is a romance, so the HEA is there, and I really, really liked it. What's the next book? Morgan Breaks the Vow. This one has plus size rep, and it is black romance between two women. It is fairly short, a little over 100 pages, and it is very spicy. It deals a lot with halfway internalized homophobia and a lot of external homophobia coming from one of our main characters' mom. Basically, that's what's keeping them apart for the whole length of the book, is one of our characters not being able to come to terms with the fact that her mom will never be proud of her no matter what she does because she's a raging homophobe. Generally a horrible person because she's not good to her other kids either. But she's been particularly nasty to our main character because our main character came out to her when she was a tween, I believe. Went back into the closet and stayed there as far as her mom knew. That starts with Lonan's War, and there are 6 books in this series. They're by Jeffy Kennedy, who I've read a fair amount from before, and I've read almost 4 of these romances. This is all one couple over 6 books with sort of epic fantasy going on in the background as opposed to other types of fantasy. So there's a lot of politics and big stuff going on, which isn't my favorite. I'm mostly just interested in the romance, but it's written so well that I'm enjoying it anyway. So, 3.5 to 4 stars for all of those. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to leave an emoji, how about a dragon? And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!